So, my name's Chris. I run the Mount St. Helens Archive social media accounts. Why Mount St. Helens? What was it that got me interested in this particular topic? And it was a family friend. It was a family friend who was a geologist. And when I was a young kid, he was the guy that was my pusher man, for lack of a better term. In the 1990s, early 1990s, he went to Portland, climbed Mount St. Helens with his family, and brought back a videotape. And that videotape had 3 specials on it. And I used to watch that religiously because that was just what I enjoyed to do growing up in the 90s. And begat books and other tapes and other things. And boy, howdy, it has been a constant in my life. The stories that are told because of this event, the human side, the geologic side, the science side, the pop culture side. I mean, you can have this incredible tragedy that takes place, and yet you have music that's created about it. You have T-shirts, you have tchotchkes, you have this cottage industry that comes about that doesn't really happen with a lot of natural disasters. You didn't see that taking place in recent memory of the kind that you saw at Mount St. Helens. And I think it's because it was such a novel experience for most Americans. If those in other countries that volcanoes are in, they seem to be used to it. But in the lower 48 states, not including Alaska and Hawaii, which see frequent volcanic activity, it hadn't been seen since the 1910s when Lassen Peak in California erupted. And so you have this novel experience, this volcano that hadn't erupted since the 1850s, waking up and doing what it did in 1980. And on top of that, really expanding the limits of science. And then of course there's the human side, and there's the lives that were affected. There's the topics like Spirit Lake, and what a wonderful place that was before 1980, and to have this connection to this point and not be able to visit it anymore was really heartbreaking for a lot of people. On top of the fact that lives were lost of this, because of this volcano. And the 57 lives have been a crucial part of my storytelling efforts. I think it's really important to keep their memories alive and to remember them, as people who were just living their lives. And almost all of them were outside of the restricted zone on May 18th. And so, they were truly innocent victims. And so 2020, we're stuck in our homes because of COVID, and, obviously it was a very difficult time for all of us. And one of the ways that I tried to not be stir crazy was to do sort of an addendum to what the U.S. Geological Survey does every year. They do an amazing job of retelling day by day the events of 1980 and the connection points with the human side and the geologic side and all that. And I kind of stepped outside because I'm an unofficial, person. I'm not connected to any agency or whatnot. I was like, let me try doing this, and kind of has gone from there. And last year I did what I call the hashtag MSH45 campaign, and that's where I met a lot of the folks that I've been able to connect with. And this last year has been absolutely incredible. So why live streaming? Well, I just figured it was something different. Let's try something different here. And so, I've have all these amazing sources of these out of print documentaries and these old television shows and whatnot. And I happened to pick this particular one because it was short, and there's some, interesting voices from passerbys that, people get interviewed. It's funny hearing them and interesting hearing theirs, but you also get, a nice sort of 30,000 foot view of what happened in 1980. And like I said, the world back then, and what has changed on the mountain as of 36 years ago. And what I'm going to try and do tonight is pop in, a couple times. Okay, I'm putting that conservatively. I'm going to pop in a lot. But I have other photos and I have other things that I want to share about some of the things that you see, kind of flesh out some of the topics, maybe fill in the gaps a little bit. And I hope that you're all settled in and going to enjoy this with me. I have my beer. Fun fact, I'm actually not from the Pacific Northwest. I'm actually from the volcanic hotspot of Western Pennsylvania. Geologic hotspot maybe at one point with the Appalachian Mountains and the Alleghenies and whatnot, but not volcanic. Well, not in recent geologic history, but I'd like to think that I probably had the largest volcanic video and photo library of any child in Western Pennsylvania. I'm confident I could say that I did. But I'm drinking a beer from St. Mary's, Pennsylvania, which is not near any place that anybody knows. Off of Interstate 80. Somewhere, if you're heading towards where the Little League Baseball World Series is played every year if you're heading eastbound to Williamsport. So that's about the closest thing that in Pittsburgh is maybe like 3 hours away. So, and that's where I'm from, is from Pittsburgh. And so without any further ado, forgiveness in advance if we have any technical issues. I did try this. I think it's going to work. And if not, grace, hopefully grace. And let's go ahead and get started then. So let me switch views here. That's not it. And let me see if I can make this bigger. I don't think I can. There we go. All right. And hopefully the audio will be A-okay. And I have pulled this directly from the original videotape. So there is an account that's on YouTube that may or may not have these videos. And, but I took out all the commercials and, just had the thing. So we're going to see some vintage 1990 commercials from Portland, for all of you Portlanders and Oregonians and going over towards Clark County and Vancouver. You might recognize these if you're from a certain age. I don't, because I haven't lived there, but that's okay. I know them well. I've had this tape for a very long time. Alrighty, and away we go.
Jack, you'll try any advice. Any advice.
Try the desert.
But the best advice is what doctors have said millions of times. Take Dimetap. Dimetap in non-prescription formulas brings proven relief. So take the advice of doctors and pharmacists
like
for
these.
allergies.
I see the desert worked.
I don't know
And
about
take
you.
Dimetap, the
I
best
miss ads
advice
like
you can
these.
take.
I'm
Pete
old.
Schulberg. Coming up on News 8 at 11, a Hazeldale man appears in court today, charged with killing a 14-year-old boy. We'll have the latest at 11 on News 8.
Channel 8 is proud to serve the Northwest by bringing you the following special presentation. Echoes of
The
the
famous
Blast,
Gary
a
Rosenquist
News 8
sequence
primetime
there.
special.
Pause that real quick. Gary took those photos from an outlook called Bear Meadow. And he was there with some other folks in his party. And he happened to have he had his camera on a tripod, happened to bump it right as the volcano started erupting, which shifted the frame of his camera to actually look at the north side of the mountain. It is one of the most, and I cannot stress this enough, one of the most important photo sequences in volcanology, in at least in geologic history. This was able to fill in so many gaps for scientists after May 18th about what happened when. How did the north side collapse? When did this massive burst come out from the mountainside? It is to have seen this live. I cannot imagine what that must have been like. No matter where you were, no matter what happened, to see a mountainside fall off. We think of Earth as being semi, I would think, semi, permanent, at least in terms of the land that we walk on. We don't normally see mountains fall apart like this. And this indeed was the largest landslide in recorded history. I've heard a few people say, no, that's not the case. But in recorded history, none bigger. And boy, howdy. What a real humdinger of one to pick, or to be it. One of the most widely recorded scientific events of the late 20th century. And for all the better.
Echoes of the Blast, a News 8 primetime special. Brought to you by Weyerhaeuser, the tree-growing company.
All right. One other thing I want to mention before Tracy starts. You're going to see a lot of Weyerhaeuser tonight. Now, Weyerhaeuser, for most of you, probably means nothing. But Weyerhaeuser in 1980 and into 1990 was and to an extent still is, a sizable part of Washington's economic landscape. Weyerhaeuser owned hundreds of thousands of acres of what they call tree farms, and which made up the majority of the land west of Mount St. Helens. Not all of the area that was in what we're going to call the blast zone was owned by the federal government. Mount St. Helens itself, it's very, very tricky to talk about this. The land ownership is a thing that I could probably do a deep dive into, but basically, the national forest that the volcano is in was in 1980 not necessarily ironclad in terms of its borders and its who owned what. Back in the 1800s, when people were still moving east or moving west, there were some incentives that the federal government did to try and entice people to buy land and railroads to build, to connect the coasts. And long story short, a railroad, the Northern Pacific, was the owner of the summit of Mount St. Helens before and in 1980. By that time, it had merged with the Burlington, and so it became the Burlington Northern. But for many, many years, leading up to 1980, there was this checkerboard sort of set up with land ownership around the mountain. But west of the mountain, in what is Cowlitz County, most of that land, west and north, so this whole area over here, was owned by Weyerhaeuser. And so they lost a ton of timber on May 18th when the lateral blast came through their area. So you're going to see a lot of Weyerhaeuser today. They do a commercial, you'll see Weyerhaeuser's role in 1980 is a little murky. People did lose their lives who were employed by Weyerhaeuser, but they weren't working technically. The entire workforce was not working on May 18th because it was a Sunday. But influences in keeping the economy going, perhaps, let's just say. Weyerhaeuser carried a big stick. And they didn't have to say much, but the big stick was loud enough for public safety or public officials to listen to them. So, all right, let's meet Tracy.
Hey everyone, I'm Tracy Berry. It's a peaceful night here at the beautiful Mount St. Helens Visitor Center near Castle Rock. A far different scene from just a decade ago, when in May of 1980, the Mount St. Helens eruption shook the Northwest. Tonight, on this 10th anniversary, we want to mark that spectacular event. We'll show you how the eruption changed lives and landscapes, how Mother Nature is making a comeback, and how you can get a little closer to it all. But first, we want to take you back to when the mountain first started waking up after a century of slumber. Walden Kirsch is our guide.
very western margin of that, if you look at it just right, you can see some shiny material. Okay, here's an eruption starting right now, right from the middle of the vent. There it comes up, mostly.
When Mount St. Helens rumbled back to life 10 years ago, it all happened in a hurry. First, in March, there was an unexpected swarm of earthquakes. In April, an ominous hole suddenly opened at the summit. Steam and ash came out, the mountain began to bulge. Clearly, something serious was brewing here, but no one could predict quite what.
But we're not going to have a lot of warning if a final big eruption starts. I think probably a day is the outside.
And minutes on the inside?
Yeah, minutes, or it might happen without really telling us it's going to happen. It might just go.
All right. So that's Dave Johnston. There's a few names that are pretty well known to even the most lay person when it comes to this story. And Dave Johnston is probably one of the top two. The other one is Harry Truman. And we're going to see a little bit of Harry today, but not a lot of Harry. But Dave really, his story is something that is straight out of a movie. And back in 1981, there was a movie that was released about Mount St. Helens called St. Helens, and it was terrible. You can probably find it on this particular website if you just search up St. Helens. A lot of people have ripped it and put it up online. I'm not telling anything that's out of turn. But it was a terrible movie, objectively. It was absolutely just completely ravaged in print media and whatnot. And one of the things that was terrible about it was that they were originally going to use Dave's name and Dave's story as part of their story of telling of the mountain, but it was all going to be fictionalized. And Dave's parents found out about it and wasn't happy about it. And so thankfully things were changed before the movie came out and it became a fictionalized geologist and whatnot. But that's the only time that anybody's ever really been able to learn about Dave in a Hollywood sense, outside of the myriad of documentaries that have aired and the newspaper articles and a very good book called A Hero on Mount St. Helens by Melanie Holmes, who is a friend of the Johnston family and did really just an incredible job, I think, in telling Dave's story. I'm going to share some photos here and tell you a little bit about Dave, because he's going to come up a little bit later when some U.S. Geological Survey scientists are interviewed, but I want to share some photos while I talk a little bit about Dave. Dave was born in, I believe, 1949 in Illinois. So he's a Midwesterner. And if you listen to him talk, you can hear the Midwestern accent come out. It's just very, I know people from the Midwest and I can pick up on it pretty easily. Dave was raised by loving, family, has a sister, Pat. They grew up in Oak Lawn, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. And, he was just the all-American kid, really. He truly was. Good grades, was liked, but not like Mr. Popular, just kind of down the middle. One of his formative experiences in growing up was there was a tornado that hit Oak Lawn in 1967, and he was a rising senior, I believe. And so I believe his mom was connected to working with a newspaper. And so Dave went out and took a bunch of photographs. And I think seeing the response of first responders and the destruction may have stuck with him as he went on in life. So he matriculates into University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, their main campus. And originally he's going to go for journalism. But then he takes a geology course and life kind of changes. I'm not clicking the photos like I should. This is Dave's family. Father, Dave, his sister, Pat, his mom. And then this is, I believe, a photo from his time at the University of Illinois. And he falls head over heels about geology, absolutely loves it, devours it. It is his life's calling. And, some of you, have gone to college or, have gone into a profession. You've had that spark moment. Dave had that spark moment then. So after he graduates, he goes and becomes a master's student and later a PhD student at the University of Washington. And Dave starts working with U.S. Geological Survey scientists as a grad assistant. One of which is a guy Pete Lippman, who he would work alongside with at Mount St. Helens. But Dave is just like the kind of guy that just is so easygoing, very passionate, but just easy to talk to, easy to get to know, laid back, but very passionate about his career and had a vision for where he wanted to go. And so, he works on his degrees. And by the time he reaches, the mid-1970s, he's doing research at an active volcano called Mount Augustine up in Alaska. Gets trapped on this island where this volcano is located and has to stay, I think, 2 days or something like that. In this shack that had been damaged by a previous eruption. So, you want to talk about being in the arena, being in the thick of it. Dave is there with one or two other, folks, roughing it and basically holding on for life because who knows if this volcano is going to erupt. They're evacuated, and within 24 hours, the volcano erupts and completely devastates the area where Dave and the one or two other folks were at. And so, that was a very formative experience. Again, talk about a formative experience, working with volcanoes that are explosive and dangerous and not the kind that are like in Hawaii, but these, what they call gray volcanoes, the ones that explode like Mount St. Helens. And so Dave, after he graduates in 1978, starts working for the Geological Survey. And it's a very promising start to his career. Eventually, in 1980, at the beginning, he's tasked to go to Alaska, a place he's very familiar with, and help run an office that's up there until March 27th, till March 1980. He is in the Pacific Northwest, goes back to his old stomping grounds at UW when he gets word that this mountain in southwestern Washington that has been quiet for 123 years is waking up. A lot of seismic activity. So he helps take turns, watching, the readings, reporting back to colleagues. And then on March 27th, news reporters, after Mount St. Helens issues its first major steam eruption, so a hole gets blown out at the top of the mountain, Dave goes to the mountain as guests of King, King, up in Seattle, and basically tells folks, this is a dangerous spot where we're at. I wouldn't want to be here if this thing actually goes. You can have incandescent ash flows, mud flows. This volcano can drop ash as far as Yakima. The dynamite keg or the dynamite fuse is lit, but we don't know how long the fuse is. So this is a guy that knew that this pretty snow-capped mountain that people knew as a recreational paradise is kind of dangerous. And so Dave, becomes part of the group that studies the mountain. Tons of geologists from the Geological Survey and other research institutions descend on the mountain, studying its every move. And Dave is there studying gases, trying to see, as other folks are, what is there an early warning sign that if this mountain goes, we can predict it somehow. So he's there with his with the COSPEC, which is something that an instrument that measures sulfur dioxide. And, he's doing all this work. At one point, he goes down into the crater of the volcano in late April when the steam and ash bursts kind of calmed down for a couple of weeks. Basically, the volcano had dried out. And he actually goes and sampled pond water from, the bottom of this massive crater that's on top of the mountain. I mean, so he was really, really something, like, not foolhardy, because, you get into this kind of business, what risks you got to take, and the really inherent risks that come. This photo here was sent to his parents, to his mom, on Mother's Day, so right before the eruption. And that is Dave standing with wearing a safety helmet next to the crater. It's kind of an eerie photo, but if you take out the eeriness, it's a really sweet and wonderful photo. It says a lot about how much he thought about his family. He really cared about his parents, really cared about his family, and he had a conversation with his parents 1 week before the eruption, and basically said, if I die, I'm doing what I'm doing, what I want to do. This is I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Mount St. Helens really was a place where Dave knew he could really grow and learn as a scientist. Let's go to May 17th, Saturday, the day before. And Dave is slated to take on a shift at a ridge that's about 6 miles north of the mountain called Coldwater 2. See, again, back then you couldn't really do this remote monitoring like you could today. There were ways that if there wasn't budgetary concerns, they could have done a rudimentary version of that with a camera, with and whatnot, a video camera with a live link, but nothing like what you can do today. So you actually had to have eyes on the mountain to watch it. And I got to tell you, they even knew that this was possibly a dangerous location, but because of the circumstances, they had no choice but to use it. So for about 2.5 weeks, almost 3 weeks, this site that's overlooking the mountain is staffed mainly by Dave's grad assistant. He's a guy by the name of Harry Glicken. And Harry Glicken is a UC Santa Barbara grad student. Glicken loves it because how many people who are, grad assistants get an opportunity to sit next to a live volcano and monitor it, for the government, for a prestigious science agency like the Geological Survey. And so he has to rotate out, though. He's got to meet his advisor in California, a date that had been fixed for months. And so it's a little bit of hot potato trying to figure out who's going to replace Harry on the ridge side, or on the ridge top, and it ultimately falls to Dave Johnston. So Dave arrives after doing some geological work, doing some stuff up at the mountain, and he's joined by two colleagues, Mindy Brugman and Carolyn Dreger. And Carolyn works for the survey, and Mindy was with Caltech, and they were studying glaciers and other things. And so they came up to the ridge top and the trailer and the International Scout that was there, the all-wheel drive and or four-wheel drive, and they kind of had a secret goal of wanting to stay the night. Dave, under no certain terms, tells him, "No, this place is dangerous. I'm really worried that something could happen here, and you would be much safer to be in Vancouver, Washington, or elsewhere, because really nobody should be up here if they don't need to be." So this is Mindy next to this spot, a couple miles north of the mountain, and it's kind of a lighthearted day. Glicken takes, or Mindy or Carolyn take photos of Glicken pretending to be a guy who's directing the volcano with its every move. Action, and you can even see volcano director in his volcano watcher hat. And so after being told by Dave, no, you can't do that, no, you got to go, Glicken eventually leaves too, but not before Carolyn Dreger snaps these two photos. These are the last photos of Dave Johnston. The following morning, May 18th, Dave has been up before dawn, has already talked with the headquarters in Vancouver, Washington, to say, No activity. Beautiful day. It's cool, 40s and the 50s. It's going to be a bright, sunny day. Don't see anything that's wrong with the mountain. But at 8:32, as we all know, the north side gives way after a 5.1 magnitude earthquake, and it begins. This photo is a photo that's from another geologist, a PhD student from the University of Idaho by the name of Jim Fitzgerald. Jim is a number of miles to the west of the mountain, and he takes a series of photos of the beginning of the eruption. Some of these photos you probably have never seen before. They've been published, but they're kind of, in books like this one, for example, which is, I highly suggest that if you're interested in this subject and you are not perturbed by a non-traditional narrative, In the Path of Destruction by USGS Emeritus Geologist Richard Waite is where you got to go. It is an incredible book and full of really priceless eyewitness accounts of the eruption from all angles. And some of the photos are in that book. So Dave, probably by this point, has uttered his famous words to on the radio, Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it. And it's got excitement. There's, this is a guy that's, this is the big, this is what we've been waiting for. This is it. And because of the interference, he gives one more and he goes, Vancouver is the transmitter on. And that's the last words of Dave Johnston. Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it. Vancouver is the transmitter on. We are going to watch a video. But of course, the blast expands, or in this case, the photo doesn't show for some reason. And Dave's site is overtaken, and unfortunately, there's no trace of Dave and very little left of the of what was Coldwater 2. And you'll see this a little bit later, or not, because again, this photo doesn't load either. Oh, we love surprises like this. There it is. Dave was based at the U.S. Geological Survey's Menlo Park, California office, which is closer to San Jose than it is to San Francisco, if you know your Bay Area well. And this was the monument that was dedicated to him a number of months after the eruption. And of course, the more visible monuments to Dave have been the David A. Johnston Cascades Volcano Observatory, which was created after the eruption to monitor most of the Cascade volcanoes, except for those, I believe, that are in California, so Oregon and Washington, as well as the Johnston Ridge and Johnston Ridge Observatory, which once it reopens, if you've never been to Mount St. Helens, you've got to go. It is a truly beautiful site. And so Dave has inspired so many people, so many geologists, scientists. Beyond that, though, just in terms of his dedication to his work, his dedication to being somebody that can help alert the public, his statements before the eruption were, I think a lot more credit is ultimately given to him than probably is in reality, because there were a lot of voices that were talking about this mountain before the eruption, but he was one of them. But he was one that was stressing the danger. Scientists are pretty cautious by nature, and geologists back then were very cautious and still are, because you cannot predict an eruption. To this day, you can't. But Dave understood the danger potential with this mountain, and as a result, I think you have seen more, when it comes to public safety, more geologists speaking in terms like him, like what he was saying about the mountain, about the potential for dangerous activity miles away from the mountain with mudslides or mud flows, lahars, and so forth. And so here's to Dave. Dave is his memory lives on. His impact continues to be felt in volcanology, geology, and beyond. And many people who have done that kind of that work really, a lot is owed to what Dave brought to the table in 1980. All right, we've got a video that we've hardly started. Let's go.
Just go.
Hundreds of people evacuated, retreated. Vacation homes at the scenic base of St. Helens emptied out, and lawmen closed off roads. Most folks in May 1980 took the volcano's threat seriously, but not everyone did.
Ask me why the hell I stay there and what I'm doing up there. That's my life. Spirit Lake and Mount St. Helens is my life, folks. I've lived there 50 years. It's a part of me. That mountain and that lake is a part of Truman, and I'm a part of it.
Nothing to be scared.
Oh, Harry. God bless him. It was March 30th when he made those comments. He was starting to become the folk hero, if you will, that everybody knew. And so he goes down to Tootle, which is a number of miles downriver from the mountain to the west. And he makes his statements, that mountain and that lake is a part of Truman, and I'm a part of it. And it's true. He had lived there for 54 years. He had owned and built the Mount St. Helens resort, lodge, if you will, by himself with, some help here and there. And, he's a guy that we're going to talk a lot more about at another time, but that's pure distilled Harry Truman. Now this guy last year got a lot of play on my social.
More danger from one of them trees falling on the backside than there is mountain of exploding.
The mountain blew violently on a calm Sunday morning. St. Helens' entire north side tore away in a matter of moments, sending a wall of 500-degree ash billowing north and into the sky. The toll was enormous. 57 people killed or missing, more than 200 square miles of forest land leveled. Hot mud flows racing down the volcano destroyed or uprooted everything in their path. Damage from the May 18 eruption would soar into hundreds of millions of dollars. The volcanic eruption 10 years ago altered the landscape here completely, profoundly. We're standing on a barren little ridgeline here, about 4 miles from the volcano. 10 years ago, though, this was a virgin forest, old growth, trees soaring overhead, moss and streams underfoot, wildlife. Now it looks very much like the moon. In addition to the volcanic rubble that's strewn about, there are also a series of odd little ponds. The one below me there is sort of a pea green due to minerals and algae. These little ponds are scattered about, each one a different size or shape or color.
It kind of looks like it. So where Walden is known as the pumice plain, right? Well, it's sort of the foot of the north side, and that is where basically a number of cabins were before the eruption. There was a guy who put out a homestead claim at the foot of the mountain way back at the beginning of the 20th century, and it was recognized by President Woodrow Wilson. And so his last name of Lang, I believe it was Robert Lang. And after he passed, it was divided into cabins. And a lot of unhappy folks who use that as vacation property and in some cases as residences were very, very, very unhappy that they didn't get access to these cabins. May 17th, the day before the eruption, they basically threatened violence. Well, at least one or two of them do. To say that they're going to go up to their cabins come hell or high water. So the governors and a re-election year, Governor Dixie Lee Ray, and nobody wants any violence, and so they get their way and they sign waivers and they go up to the mountain. Of course, 24 hours later, less than 24 hours later, the mountain erupts. But nobody knew that it would at the time. So if you take a look at that scene, let's go back here a little bit. Okay, hi Walden, how are you? There you go. This is where they were, basically, maybe a little bit to the west. And it's now buried under hundreds of feet of mountaintop, as well as deposits from the mountain. So that would be mud deposits, so lahars, pyroclastic flows, which you could say are smaller versions of what devastated all of that land, all the square miles, and whatever else. I mean, it just completely buried. You would have to dig a pretty deep hole in order to be able to find what that land looked like. So that's the kind of fire that they were playing with the day before the eruption. This is what that land became not 24 hours later. And if you watch some of the interviews, people are like, we should be able to come back whenever we want. Windows closing. And it is an absolute miracle that mountain did not erupt with those people there. It would have been, 57 is horrible, but you can't even imagine. Between that and all of the logging lands being full of loggers on Monday, they would have been there. Lot of bullets were dodged with this eruption. It could have been so much worse.
The volcanic eruption 10 years ago altered the landscape here completely, profoundly. We're standing on a barren little ridgeline here about 4 miles from the volcano. 10 years ago, though, this was a virgin forest, old growth, trees soaring overhead, moss and streams underfoot, wildlife. Now it looks very much like the moon. In addition to the volcanic rubble that's strewn about, there are also a series of odd little ponds. The one below me there is sort of a pea green due to minerals and algae.
Don't, because you'll
probably
probably get really sick.
About, each one a different size or shape or color. Although some life is slowly returning to the volcano's blast zone, most of the eerie landscape here looks just as dusty and gray as the day after the eruption. Spectacular Spirit Lake here, still clogged with millions of dead fir trees. The timber blown into Spirit Lake by the force of the eruption and still bobbing about a decade later. From explosion to erosion. It was at this spot 10 years ago, 8:32.
So, it's changed a bit since 1990. Spirit Lake is doing a lot better than in 1990. It was doing good, better than what a lot of biologists and scientists thought that it would be. But yeah, the whole landscape here, it's amazing what the first 10 years looked like and then what the next 36 years looked like. What you saw was the slow encroachment of greenery back into this landscape. And then with Spirit Lake, which was hundreds of feet higher than what it was before May 18th, 1980, because the landslide went into the water, displaced the water, pulled back a ton of logs that had been felled by the lateral blast, which passed over, brought back all these dead logs, and then they just floated, and they still continue to float on the surface. It was basically killed, for lack of a better term, on May 18th, with so much material thrown into it. This once clear, beautiful gem of the Northwest was completely and utterly changed. And it took many years for it to actually become a healthy lake again. And then, of course, you had some people like the guy that drove somehow down to the lake in the late 1980s and threw trout in there because why not? I know with that person, I know what they were thinking. They're like, well, if they see that, then maybe they'll reopen the lake, completely forgetting the fact that there's a national monument that's closed in many spaces for scientific research, including Spirit Lake. And so, you could say hubris, you could say a couple different things. Moron comes to mind for me. But yes, some species were reintroduced not naturally to Spirit Lake. But today, Spirit Lake really looks great. And especially the hills around the mountain are becoming covered in trees and these meadows that have grown, and it's going to be a very long time, if ever, that we're going to see what it looked like before 1980 around this landscape. But it looks a lot better. A whole lot better.
From explosion to erosion. It was at this spot 10 years ago, 8:32 in the morning, that Mount St. Helens went bang. Today, 10 years later, the changes happening here inside St. Helens crater are far more gradual. The jagged 900-foot-high lava dome, for example, is no longer swelling a decade later. Still, the lava dome belches steam and foul-smelling sulfur gases, and occasionally it still quakes. 10 years now after St. Helens blew, its power must still be reckoned with.
It looks big. It might be really big. I would not want to stand in the way, but when they zoom back, it makes you feel like it's just
down the
pebbles,
crater
but
wall.
it's not pebbles.
Blocks of ice as big as cars, tumbling for 1,000 feet to the crater floor. In a decade, Mount St. Helens has grown no less fascinating, just to watch. I'm Walden Kirsch, News 8.
Those pictures.
There we go. Okay. Hi. Fun little fact about Walden Kirsch. I believe his father worked for like Xerox or something. And I read this. I don't know how. I soak up things like I'm a Trivial Pursuit sponge. I believe he was the subject of the first digital photo. So like the first digital camera photo. Fun facts. It's not just all about volcanoes. Anyways. So yeah, back then in 1990, the dome was still kind of active. The first initial dome eruptions after the mountain erupted in 1980, there was a couple times after May 18th where a dome was built and then it kind of got blown sky high because more eruptions took place. But then after October of 1980, what you see today in the crater of Mount St. Helens, let me see if I can move Tracy here. Okay, there we go. Hi. What you see there is basically that was the foundation of what you see today. And so over 6 years, successive dome building events would take place. And in 1986, the last one. Now, in 1990, there had been some steam activity and whatnot, some steam explosions, but nothing major until 2004. And I think a lot of you remember when the mountain reawoke in 2004, October of 2004, in fact. And that was a big memory. I remember that. I was thinking like, oh, I'm never going to see Mount St. Helens erupt. And then it did. And it erupted for 4 years and built the dome that's behind the 1980 to 86 dome. The one that when you climb the mountain, it would be the one closest to you at the top of the, or at the crater's rim. And so, yeah, it was not that long since it had been active, but it was sort of in that stage of could it reawaken? Maybe not. So anyways, let's continue.
Still amazing 10 years later. And how about this scene? This is Silver Lake over my shoulder, and on a clear day, that's where you can see Mount St. Helens. Now, most of us watch the changes on Mount St. Helens sort of as a pastime, but for some people, it's a full-time profession, like the geologists at the U.S. Geological Survey Office in Vancouver. Pat Cruz is standing by live there right now. Pat, what are they still watching for 10 years later?
Well, Tracy, they have sensors all over the mountain and the area around it, seeing if it's tremoring or if it's tilting anyway. There's a sensor right on top of the dome, and that's hooked to this seismograph here. There's a sensor at the base of the crater that's hooked to this seismograph here. They even have a camera pointing at the crater, and this is the picture that they see of the crater today. As you can see, the crater is covered with clouds.
How lucky
which is why
to
we're
have a
here
completely
tonight
overcast
near the
May
mountain
18th
where we
so you
expect
can't
it to
see
be.
anything.
You know, the area where the
magic of
camera
live
is,
television.
very few people are allowed in that area right now. But in a couple of years, people will be able to go there, and we'll show you what it looks like later on in the program.
All right, thanks, Pat. It sounds like it should be quite an adventure. We'll check back with you a little bit later on. We talk a great deal about how destructive the mountain can be and the toll that 1980 eruption took on people and property. But you know, there are also amazing stories of survival. Kathy Kiyomura has one of those stories for us tonight, and why I definitely think it's worth watching. I do want to warn you that some of the pictures are very graphic and can be difficult to see.
So Tracy warns that the next segment, which is about logger Jim Shemanke, contains some graphic images. I have made the executive decision to blur those images. I hope that is indeed showing as blurred on here. It is the only time that I have actually ever seen up-close photos of the injuries that survivors faced, and they are pretty gnarly. Basically, the worst, if you can imagine the worst burns It's worse than that. So I've decided to blur them. But again, you can find this online, and you can probably find those photos. So the internet is what it is.
It was a gorgeous day. You couldn't ask for a better day. Lots of elk and deer up there. The only thing I remember that's kind of weird is we didn't hear any birds. Next thing we knew, Jose was running down through the trees and stuff.
The only video footage of the
yelling
eruption.
in Spanish the volcano was exploding.
The sky turned black, according to eruption survivor Jim Shemanke. A searing blast of heat then burned him and 3 other members of his tree thinning crew.
The whole world was ash, you know. It was just gray, gray, gray crap falling out of the sky. It was so hot that you didn't have time to even think about what it was. I mean, you try to get air, and there's no air. You're burning up at the same time. What we were thinking about was, God, how long is it going to be before we die, you know? I mean, Jesus, we can't go on forever. You know, I mean, the pain was so great that we wished to hell we were dead by that time.
Severely burned and dazed, Jim Shemanke and the others stumbled and crawled to their truck. The mangled rig was smashed by trees. They started walking toward Camp Baker, a logging facility. After a 4.5-mile trudge through deep ash, they stopped by a stream. They prayed for death. Hours passed. Jim recalled seeing an angel, a helicopter, drop from the sky.
I could see Jim would stand up and wave his arms, and then he'd sort of fall down. And I landed there and went back to flight idle and locked the controls up. It was really sort of unbelievable.
Okay, so these are
the photos big open sores, probably the size of silver dollars.
My arms and my back and upper part of my chest here got burned, and right here on the back of my calves.
His gloves were cooked black.
So I didn't blur these, but those are Jim's gloves welded to his hands. So just to give you an idea of how hot it was.
You know, kind of swerved in there.
Jim was transported to a manual hospital.
He had about a little over 45% burn.
Still be in Portland.
The burns looked quite similar to what we see with hot water burns as opposed to flame burns.
Last blur.
Jim's co-workers, Jose Diaz, Leonte Skorohodov, and Avalante
that is a picture,
Sharapov,
unfortunately,
died.
of a deceased victim, so I've also blurred it.
You know, how did I come out of this? Because I know 99% of the people that died up there are a hell of a lot better people than what I am. And the people that died alongside of me were perfectly legitimate. We weren't in any red zone or anything. I think there was only a few people in the red zone.
Evidence suggests that only 3 of the 57 dead or missing were in the official danger zone, the red zone, at the time of the eruption.
God probably said, well, these people died up there. They're buried under ash, trees, boulders, God knows what all. He said, I'm going to leave this guy here to be able to speak for them since they can't speak for themselves. That's probably the only reason I survived.
Jim will never be able to log again, but we are happy to report that he is going to school, training to become a building inspector. Can it happen again? We'll look at that question when we come back as we talk to some of the scientists who are closest to the eruption, and we'll show you how to get closer to the mountain's changing landscape.
Where were you when Mount St. Helens blew?
I was with my family visiting my grandparents in Longview, Washington.
So what was it like? What do you remember?
I remember when it started to snow ash, and that's when we all decided to pack up and leave for home.
I was at home, and it scared the actual hell out of me.
All right, before we see the glossy Weyerhaeuser ad that runs literally during every single ad break because they want you to know we're the tree growing people. Jim Shemanke was, as you heard, with a group of loggers who were working on a subcontract, I think maybe like 14, 15 miles west-northwest of the mountains. So mountain is miles away. And in fact, let me see if I can... So that's the music that you were listening to. Let's see. I'm going to get rid of that so you don't know. Okay. Let's go to maps. Forget it, folks. I should have had that loaded up and I didn't. But that being said, he was with this group of loggers, and he said that what it reminded him was just cinders coming through the trees after his colleague Jose Diaz, who refused to work because he was Catholic and it was Sunday, he was running barefoot through the trees screaming, the volcano is erupting in Spanish. I forget the actual phrase. It just lost me on top of my head. And it just overcame him and his crew, the crew he was with, almost like that. And their survival story, his survival story, is truly incredible. As you heard, let me go out of Dave, and I have some stuff of Jim. So this is Jim back in 1980. He's 36 years old. I am 38. That is, yeah. And so, this lateral blast, this photo was taken by two survivors who were kind of in the same general geographical area as Jim, maybe a couple miles away. But this is the lateral blast coming toward the west. And it is overtaking every hillside, just leapfrogging them. These 1,000-foot, a couple 1,000 feet tall ridges, just jumping over them like they're nothing. And so this is coming toward him, and then it hits. And, he's in so much pain, and his colleagues are in so much pain. And after hours, they finally find water, and they're able to drink the water, and it's still not enough. Had they not been picked up, had Jim and Eviante Skorohodov, who was the other person who was picked up with him, had they not drunk water, they probably wouldn't have made it a couple more hours. Two of the people, as you heard, of the crew walked off. One was actually rescued in the middle of a mud flow, Jose Diaz. It's a story that is told in Richard Waite's book, which again, plugging. But it is, he's on a felled log that is surrounded by flowing mud, and is just plucked off of this, log that's just surrounded, by this massive mud flow. It's incredible. But I mean, to see this coming towards you is absolutely crazy. His recovery was really difficult. Burns covered a large portion of his body. All of his colleagues died. He was the only person out of four to survive the eruption. And he had his wife and his kids. I mean, this was a life-changing event for Jim. And after a number of months, he finally went home, and he had to rebuild his life. There is another book about the eruption called Echoes of Fury, which focuses by Frank Parchment, and it focuses a lot on the human stories that are behind the eruption, victims' families, survivors. Peter Frenzen, who became the monument scientist for many years, who, if you ever saw anybody being interviewed about the eruption and the recovery of the land, you're very likely to see Peter Frenzen. But, this was something that absolutely changed the course of Jim Shemanke's life. Eventually, he got into auto restoration with his sons, but this is somebody that still, he's still alive. He's in his 80s. But I had somebody, his daughter-in-law commented on one of my posts on Instagram last year, which was that was a moment, that kind of caught me off guard. I was not expecting that. And she said, whole lives were completely changed that day. And even 46 years later, this is still in recovery. And these folks, these survivors, I really have a lot of respect for them. I mean, I truly do. I mean, obviously I have a lot of reverence for this story in general, but the survivors who are, contacted by, documentarians, 40 years, 45 years, 25 years, 10 years, 20 years. And they have to relive what had to have been the most harrowing, what most people never experience, the level of trauma that they had to experience. And to have that change the trajectory of your life in just such a few hours. I really, truly have deep respect for Jim Shemanke and for others who survived this eruption, who were, they weren't able to just, well, that's behind me, I can move on now. These folks really had to go through medical and physical pain, anguish. They had to rebuild, how to walk, how to move, how to be employed. I mean, and to do that in almost obscurity with no assistance, I really, like I said, I just truly have so much respect for people like Jim Shemanke. So let's go ahead and go back to this video. So this is the nice puff. This is, as somebody who works in this kind of business, it's very much that we're the good people. We're Weyerhaeuser, and to an extent.
When Mount St. Helens erupted on May 18, 1980, it seared the very life out of the land.
Very glossy.
In the heart of the blast zone, little that was alive and above the ground survived. Weyerhaeuser went to work immediately on its tree farm site, first clearing fallen timber, then planting new trees. More than 18 million of them. Today, some of those trees are more than 25 feet tall. They're green and growing. Wild animals have returned along with the forest. The elk are back, so are the birds. The rivers run clean and clear. The steelhead have returned to spawn. It's all possible when we give nature a helping hand with our most precious renewable resource, trees. Weyerhaeuser, the tree growing company.
Look what Sizzlers put together for $6.99. For a limited time, you can get a grilled boneless breast of lemon herb chicken, a baked potato, cheese toast. You can get seafood salad
you get to a
potato
point
skins,
where
fresh
even
fruit, and a tostada with the works.
Stuff that's
you
36
can even
years
get
old,
pasta with your choice of sauces.
I can
lemon
feel,
herb chicken and
I can
Sizzlers
read that
all-you-can-eat
copy
salad
and,
bar, all
hey,
for just $6.99. But you
replanted
better get it soon
trees.
because it's
Did
only
it.
available for a short time.
Also, Sizzler, how about that?
Royal Oak is for the good times.
Quality Royal Oak charcoal.
A lot of grilling and
long burning.
meats.
It's been the standard of excellence
going on
for over 40 years.
This particular commercial break.
For the good times with your family and good friends.
Win a 1990 S10 Chevy Blazer 4x4, a Javelin fish and ski boat, more than 250 great prizes in the
man,
Royal Oak
I want a
Great
Chevy
Outdoor
Blazer.
Sweepstakes. Look for entry blanks where you buy Royal Oak charcoal.
That's when
Welcome
we used to
back
be
to
a
the Mount
proper
St. Helens
country.
Visitor
That was
Center.
when we were a
moved-
proper country, when we would win things like Chevy Blazers. It all went just to pieces. Give me just a Chevy Astrovan. Say thank you to Royal Oak charcoal briquettes for that.
Inside, where there's all kinds of interesting exhibits. You can probably see the replica of the crater right there behind me. This is a very popular spot, and for good reason. More than 1 million people a year make the trip here to try to relive the eruption. There's slides and models and maps, and they come from all over the world to marvel at what the volcano created.
Unbelievable. Beautiful center. A lot I didn't know about Mount St. Helens.
These testimonials.
That
Just
I'm learning
very
here
on
that
the
I
spot.
didn't get out of the newspaper.
What do you like about it?
Too difficult to explain for me in English.
I think they've done an outstanding job of preserving the interest and the information about this tremendous event.
Stop it.
We think they've done a great job.
Anyways, yeah, I just Virginia visitor, Switzerland visitor, Virginia visitor, or whatever, Alaska visitor. I have been there. Not meaning to flex, but yeah, I've been there, and I mean, this is the old version, and these photos are okay. I was really trying my hardest to be like, I want to document my trip to Mount St. Helens. I went in 2017. It was right before my 30th birthday. My wonderful wife was like, hey, if I buy the airfare, can you get everything else? Sure. Thanks, sweetheart. This is like, my number one on my dream come true list. So we tried climbing Mount St. Helens, and we realized that we were not prepared for it. So we went up a quarter of the way up Monitor Ridge and turned around. Everything told us that it was going to be easy or easier, and we were in shape, people. That was a lie. So I think we could probably do it now, but definitely not back then. So anyways, the next day after our summit attempt ended in failure, we went to the north side. And so we went by all these places, and this has a very, if you're me, you love a good, untouched visitor center museum experience. Like give me a 1980s, what the audiences want. Like I want long paragraphs and old photos, and just I loved. If you've never been to the Air and Space Museum in Washington D.C., second big love is outer space stuff. It is incredibly fun to go to. They're doing an amazing renovation, but before it was just like very dated, and in a 70s it kind of smells way, but in a like, oh, it's the same experience every time. So I know what it's my favorite hits. I guess it was kind of like that with this. But the state parks have done an incredible job of updating it since. If you haven't gone or haven't been in many years, I would go now. They have changed the video that plays there, and it's very well done. I had a chance to watch it last year. And a lot of the kind of, this kind of display stuff, all of that has been taken down. It's been replaced with, I think, a lot more interactive things like, oh, here's a seismometer and whatnot. With a seismograph. So it was a different time. This is how we used to learn, and that's all changed with the TikTok and the YouTube and anyways. All right. It doesn't matter to me. I'm fine anyway.
As well, and we're happy to be here this evening. We do tend to think of the mountain in destructive terms, but it's also responsible for creating a lot of things, like this visitor center. It's created new facilities and new jobs, and Pat Cruz is standing by at another one of those locations right now. Pat, I understand there's even more new development on the way.
That's right. The U.S. Geological Survey built this field office just so that scientists could monitor Mount St. Helens. Now the state is building a highway so that you can get a close-up view of the crater. Right now, you have to take a 3-hour trip to see the crater. You have to go over to Randall and down to Windy Ridge. In 2 years, you'll be able to get even closer to the crater in an hour and 15 minutes.
When you couldn't
the
just
Forest
drive
Service is building
to Mount
2
St.
visitor
Helens
centers
from
there.
the west.
Here's a glimpse of what you'll get to see.
Yeah, we'll keep going for now.
For 10 years now, only a privileged few have had access to this mysterious landscape. Only geologists, Forest Service employees, and a few lucky reporters have had a chance to wander through the splendid...
That is the buried North Fork Tudor River Valley, and what you can kind of see in the photos from the U.S. Geological Survey, and really anybody who's been there in the last 20 plus years who can drive up there has a much better job of it. But what you see are known as hummocks. And the way that the landslide went down the valley, and it went quite a distance, is that they all bunched together because it was just flowing earth with glaciers and trees and everything that it had picked up. But I mean, it's the mountaintop. I mean, it's lava. It's, old lava deposits. It's old cinders and ash and, tephra and yada, 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 all this stuff. But it would all come together in like these hills, like these, bumpy hills. And so it really made for a kind of a spooky looking landscape. A lot of this is now covered by alder, by trees, grass, in really like 20 years time, from like 1990 to like 2010. I mean, just the coverage became incredible. And now if you go today, you can see still, but you can more see the tops of trees kind of echoing the echoes of the blast. Hi, how you doing? That was easily, I looked at the screen and then I saw the word. But you can see the canopies of the trees kind of following the contour of the ground as well. So you see like these rolling hills of alder. And alder is known as being not necessarily an old growth kind of tree. And so those will eventually pass, and you will start to probably see more of the evergreens that kind of took over the hills, the upper hills. Up here is Elk Rock. You actually go around Elk Rock here on the highway, and that whole area has been replanted by Weyerhaeuser, the tree growing company. And so you'll start seeing a lot more of those kind of trees here in the Valley Forest, probably in the next 50 years. So take your vitamins if you want to see evergreens down in the valley floor.
Trails of this volcano. But those smoke signals on the horizon
no, what's
say
that?
Civilization is on the way.
Industry.
Construction crews are forging a path through the debris and destruction so that the general public can drive up and get a close-up view of the eruption zone coming back to life again. The trick is to build this road without disrupting the landscape any more than they have to. The Spirit Lake Memorial Highway will open in fall of 1992. Ron Burnett has mixed feelings about opening this gate and bringing 1 million tourists a year into this virgin territory. He's in charge of designing the Coldwater Johnson Recreation Area.
Somewhere in this vicinity is going to be the premier viewing plaza for the Coldwater facilities. Off your direction will be a fast food restaurant facility, and off this direction will be some exhibits and displays that talk specifically about the rock slide debris avalanche.
This vantage point will give you a picture of what happened during the big eruption. The earthquake that shook the wall of debris that blocked Coldwater Creek and turned it into a lake. People ought to get a chance to see this, but people can get in the way of the natural recovery process.
Even though we have these isolated pockets of development within the monument, the entire philosophy of the monument is that this is a brand new planet, and this is going to come back the way it would have come back had nobody been here to touch it. The beauty of it is that we get to have people here that get to watch that process.
Burnett can hardly wait to show people the hummocks, those mounds of debris that slid from the side of the mountain.
When people are walking around out on this barrier-free trail, suddenly they're going to begin to understand that that's the inside of Mount St. Helens. In fact, a geologist can tell me exactly where this piece of turf was inside of Mount St. Helens.
And
so you're actually walking through the insides of the volcano when you walk through this trail.
I don't.
He hopes those trails will bring people to the same realization that strikes him.
And when it comes in and finally hits you, the state you're in is that the Earth is alive, and it's constantly changing. We just happen to be in this little nanosecond of geologic time when the photo shutter went down.
Burnett is confident that when people see the evidence of the power behind this explosion, it will give them reverence, so they will let this mountain be and let nature restore its own without getting in the way. The Forest Service expects to see about 1 million visitors in that area by the year 2000. Tracy?
All right, thank you, Pat. Very interesting. Now, even though people are beginning to enjoy
really
some of their old activities on the mountain, scientists are still keeping a very close watch on the volcano. Don Reed talked to some scientists who have known the mountain in its most dramatic times and in its quieter moments.
Scientists are left to watch and wait. For despite tremendous gains in knowledge, volcano behavior remains in many ways a mystery. Some of the first science...
All right. Before we get a little bit further, just real quick about that segment. So the National Volcanic Monument was created in 1982. There was about almost 2 years worth of debate about how much to cover, how much to protect, how much land was going to continue to be logged, how much was too much, and then, of course, what's the Forest Service going to do in order to be able to provide recreational opportunities. where you saw that map a little while ago at the beginning of this segment. There we go. Almost nailed it. You had to go, Portland's here. Of course, Seattle's way up there. You had to basically get off. Castle Rock is not there. That's wrong. Castle Rock is south of there. Shame. But you had to basically go up to like Toledo, Vader area of Lewis County, and then take Highway 12 all the way to Randall, which is a really long trip. I know, because we were thinking about doing that, and then we saw how much time it would take, and that got vetoed. And then go all the way down to Windy Ridge, which is a viewpoint that is overlooking Spirit Lake from the east. East, looking west, and looking to the mountain from the towards the southwest. And that was really outside of the south side of the volcano, which had some impacts on May 18th, but not nearly as bad as the northwest and a little bit of the east side. That was the only place that you can go and actually see Mount St. Helens. So building this road, which was relocated out of the valley floor because everybody now realized, lahars happen. And if we rebuild, it's probably going to get wiped out. So be smarter. Don't be dumb. Put it up on the ridge. So when they started building these things, it was really like the best opportunity for people to be able to come and actually look at the mountain. You weren't really able to see the mountain before that, except if you wanted to take that really long day trip. And so everybody had these big ideas about like, hey, why don't we, build all of these visitor centers to come up here? And so there were, in like the late 90s, I want to say like 5 visitor centers, something along those lines, official visitor centers. And that's not talking about institutions like Norfolk Survivors, who the owner, Joe, I've gotten to know, and is a very lovely fellow who is of like mind in terms of wanting to preserve this history. The county of Cowlitz had a visitor center. Weyerhaeuser had a visitor center. The Forest Service, before they divested the one that this program is coming from, had 3 visitor centers. I mean, they were really expecting a ton of people to come out to Mount St. Helens. That didn't happen. For various reasons, that has still not happened. Mount Rainier, Mount Hood, you see a lot of tourists come there, and tourists still come to Mount St. Helens, but not in the numbers that justified the amount of visitor experiences that one could have up on the mountain. And what you saw was, over the course of the following, so this is 1990, maybe the following 25 years, a decrease in amenities and visitor opportunities. The cold water facility, which is what is being talked about in this segment, the gentleman talking about, the fast food's going to be here and the visitors, the exhibits are going to be over here. That was built. That's there. In fact, that's the only place that you can go to up in the mountain right now. The Mount St. Helens Institute, which is a nonprofit that basically acts as, educational and recreational sort of support to the National Volcanic Monument. They run that now as an educational center, and it's actually plans are to make it an overnight camp space with some additional acreage above the center. But it closed originally. Maybe about 20-ish years ago. I can't remember when it exactly closed. The Cowlitz County Visitor Center closed and was sold off and is now a retreat center for Christians. I'm saying that broadly because I do not know what denomination it is. The Weyerhaeuser Forest Resource Center is still there. But then the Forest Service sold off the Sequest State Park, the Mount St. Helens Visitor Center, sold that off to the state of Washington. And so Mount St. Helens has sort of always been, this, everybody knows it, you got to go see it. But in terms of sustainable recreation and getting numbers in, ever since the eruption, it's never met any of the projections that people have had, either that because people were legitimately afraid of the mountain or because, just the opportunities weren't there or some other bureaucratic reason. And I think that people are very mindful that this mountain still has a huge pull over many people. Hi, how you doing? And there's still plenty of opportunities that, to be mindful of the monument's mission of preserving this land while still providing access opportunities and whatnot. And so it will be really interesting to see how that continues to play out. But Mount St. Helens, it is one of those things nearly has never been able to fulfill its potential as a place to visit as opposed to other.
Will be a fast food restaurant facility.
Right, we already watched this. We can scrub ahead. We gotta
Wait,
go. All
for
right.
despite
Here
tremendous
is
gains
the
in
segment
knowledge,
that's
volcano
about
behavior
geologists.
remains in many ways a mystery. Some of the first scientists to arrive at Mount St. Helens have returned now to the USGS regional headquarters here in Menlo Park, California. And all of them remember clearly the eruption that brought both excitement and personal sorrow.
We did not expect, naturally, that there would be such a cataclysmic eruption.
Just outside the office of geologist Jim Moore stands a monument to friend and colleague David Johnston.
And then, as you know, there was a final message when the eruption occurred, Vancouver, this is it.
Johnston disappeared during the May 18th eruption of Mount St. Helens, and Moore joined a search party after the blast.
Although it became quite obvious when we were in the air over the volcano that there was no living thing in that close to the crater itself.
Volcanologists spend their lives studying the forces of the Earth, but even these scientists were not prepared for what they witnessed.
When the lateral blast did occur and we saw the extent of devastation and the nature of the devastation that had occurred, it was a very humbling experience and almost an overwhelming one for a while.
Now, 10 years later, the volcano is calm. But volcanic activity in the Northwest is not over.
Yeah, Bob
Some
was sort of
scientists say it's likely
chief
Mount Rainier
scientist.
and Mount Hood will erupt during our lifetimes.
One of
And
the
Mount St.
leaders
Helens remains
scientists
the
back in
most
1980
explosive
for the survey.
volcano in the lower 48. Don Reese, News 8.
Portlanders know that view.
Well, the mountain's very destructive character is a constant challenge for many people. Coming up next, we'll meet the residents of the Toutle River area who live in the mountain's shadow. It's a very exciting time for them, and we'll also see how Mother
Time
Nature
does
is
heal.
rebuilding what the eruption destroyed.
I believe that was a Todd Rundgren song.
For a couple months watching it bubble and boil,
Testimonials,
and then when it
nothing
really
beats that
happened,
guy,
I think
though,
it just
from earlier.
it was unbelievable. We didn't expect the devastation.
All I could think of is here I left earthquakes in California for volcanoes.
Everybody's so 1990s. Oh, look, it's that Weyerhaeuser adding in. Hey, remember this? And all the. All right, we're so over time. So let's. Hey, Arnold Palmer.
Well, that came along a little later.
Latrobe, Pennsylvania.
Well, that
Also
goes back to my dad.
Location of the
That was his motor oil.
Steelers
I'll tell
training
you,
camp every year.
you couldn't be
at
around
St.
him long
Vincent
without
College.
learning the value of keeping the equipment
Powell's
running.
books.
And
So,
you know,
I'm trying to say
everything
that
around here is still working.
could live in the
Pennzoil, ever since America learned to drive.
Not.
We all have our memories of the day that
All
Mount
right,
St.
final
Helens
stretch
blew,
here,
but
folks.
some people live with a much larger reminder. Tim Storrs traveled down the Toutle River where the residents there have rebuilt their lives and in some cases their homes.
Mount St. Helens blew apart lives in itself
Weyerhaeuser
10 years
bridge
ago,
that is
washing
being-
it all down the
that
Toutle
would
River
eventually
in a mire
be
of fractured
washed
trees,
away.
bridges, and dreams. Riverfront property became a liability to anyone living close to the Toutle River when the volcano erupted. Houses washed away and disappeared along the entire stretch. This stretch of the river is called Maple Flats. It used to be much larger. On May 18th, there were nearly a dozen houses on this settlement, half of them on this side of the river. But they're not here anymore, because the night of May 18th, they all washed downstream in the flow of mud and ash.
When the mud came in, and whoever broke the windows out, of course, a lot of the mud would flow out then, you know.
Harry McNutt arrived from New Mexico to his retirement home on the Toutle 3 days after Mount St. Helens erupted. Mud filled the place to the first floor. Mud still stains the outside like a bathtub ring, and he spent the last 10 years cleaning.
Right down here, I'm just now digging it out. That's been buried for 10 years. That's my fishing pad down there.
McNutt spent nearly 2 weeks shoveling out his house. Repairs left him $70,000 in the hole. Still, he's better off than neighbors across the river.
that guy over there, he keeps cutting his house off. As the bank erodes, he just saws the house off. So he's pointed back to the bathroom now, so I don't know how much longer he'll be there. But there's 3 or 4 houses washed in down there in the last year and a half, 2 years.
On the south side of the Toutle, James and Ann Arnett are cleaning their summer campsite. They never built on the river's edge, and glad of it.
I think there were supposed to be 175 from the road.
That's a no for me.
Out to the bank on the river.
I don't know about you.
Oh, we've lost a good 40 or 50 feet. Of course,
On the upside, the Arnetts now pay lower taxes on what's left of their yard, but they still rake 10-year-old ash from it.
We had about 3 feet of mud flow still on it, and we had to clean that all off in order to save our trees.
The Arnetts had less to lose than most. Harry McNutt had staked most of his future on his place, and in both cases, determination brought them back.
Hanging on. You know you can't live under the viaducts anymore. They're already full.
Determination, and in some cases, desperation. Along the Toutle River, Tim
absolutely wild.
Mother Nature is also very determined to make a comeback on some 100 square miles of barren earth. Little patches of green started poking their way through soon after the blast. Now those patches cover large areas, especially near the streams that trickle out of the crater. On the hillsides, wildlife has come back too. You can actually hear the howl of the coyote,
everything's great
deer,
again.
and elk scamper through a landscape.
Mount St. Helens is doing
being
great. Look at all the deer.
Of course, the life of a mountain, 10 years isn't very long. But tonight, Lou Frederick takes us to Clearwater Creek, a place where 10 years has made a big difference.
After 10 years, the bark is finally falling off trees stripped of their needles. Many white sticks of old-growth forest remain to make sure we remember what happened here in the Clearwater Valley. We're standing on the only bridge over Clearwater Creek that managed to survive the eruption of Mount St. Helens on May 18,
this is on
1980.
the east side.
And the Clearwater Valley has given us a unique opportunity to discover just how nature recovers from such a catastrophic event.
I think we really feel by now that it's evident time heals all things.
Mother Nature has a way of coming back that I don't think any of us really were able to comprehend until we were able to come out here and see it.
What you see are researchers in scuba gear counting fish.
Think about
Others count and collect
the kind of things I want to do is just stick my head in the creek.
The fish came down from a lake that was covered with snow during the eruption. The insects flew in. Both rely on wood and leaves from nearby, and that includes the gigantic trees that fell into the stream. In some places, those trees were pulled from the Clearwater by loggers and the Forest Service. In other places, the Forest Service put down trees back in the water. And the Forest Service began a massive replanting program, not just Douglas fir, but willows, lodgepole pine, white pine, silver fir, spruce, and cottonwood.
We put these in to shade the stream, and we're currently looking at 40-foot trees.
Unfortunately, beavers also like cottonwoods for housing material and food. But the main focus is Douglas fir and getting it to grow. Surprise, it's growing very well. Some trees are already producing cones.
Riveting stuff, folks. This is why they put this segment last.
7.
Sorry
8.
To everybody in the sciences.
Teams of surveyors check out the number and condition of the trees regularly. The key is how they were planted, under the crust of ash,
see
deep
how
enough
deep
to touch
the
water.
Deposits were from
We also had
wild.
a lack of other vegetation. So a combination of adequate soil moisture and no competition, we got exceptional growth.
But it's too early to judge success or failure. It will take years, centuries to replace the old-growth forest
those have
that once grew
disappeared.
here. And until that happens, Clearwater Creek will continue recovering from May 18, 1980. The good news is we get to watch and learn from that recovery. Lou Frederick, News 8.
Oh, and there is a lot to watch here, like the continued earthquake activity going on under Mount St. Helens.
Look, a visual aid.
10 years
It's a
have
prop.
passed, but the echoes of the blast are still strong. Thank you for joining us tonight, and have a good evening.
Sunrise. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, we went up to Mountain Park, and there was Mount Hood, Mount St. Helens, and this beautiful sun going up between them. And it was 2 hours later that we heard that it erupted, and we could not believe that we had actually watched the last sunrise between the two mountains.
Rosanna Dana. All right. So we did it, everybody. We got
This
through
News 8
a half
Primetime
hour,
Special
and
was
I
brought
spoke
to you
for
by
most of that
Weyerhaeuser,
time.
the tree growing company.
I'm going to get better at this, I think. Yeah, there it is. Yes, 3 times. Third time's the charm. No, we're gonna move on. So I just want to show some photos real quick before wrapping it up. Some mudflow photos that were taken in the aftermath that were taken by the U.S. Geological Survey. And so one thing that I did do that I'd like to share if I can, just to give you an idea of, so you heard the term, you heard the place Maple Flats. So I want to give you an idea. So here's that map that I wanted to bring up. A fellow St. Helens enthusiast by the name of Kelly has, because of this book, In the Path of Destruction, available through Washington State University Press, or wherever Mount St. Helens literature is sold, was so inspired by that book that he created on his own this amazing custom Google map in which you can see all the major locations where victims were, where survivors were, all this stuff. And so one thing that you can see here is, so when we're talking about Maple Flats, we're talking about this area of Mount St. Helens, which is about 25 miles west-northwest. If you have been to Mount St. Helens and you know that there's that big giant sediment dam that traps all the loose sediment that comes down from the mountain, it's a little bit to the west of that. And so, before 1980, nobody really knew that this river would be completely taken, this beautiful mountain stream, would turn into this lethal, incredibly, dangerous, muddy concrete wall of water and volcanic debris. And so, people built along the river, clearly. And unfortunately, volcanic hazards were not necessarily disclosed to people back in, if you purchased your house in 1977, nobody was going, oh, and Mount St. Helens might erupt and a whole bunch of water is going to come down your way like that. That wasn't told to people. And so, you go to the mud flows in the aftermath. You had feet worth of material that was deposited along it even for quarter of a mile, half a mile beyond the banks, that would bury roads and buried houses. And so I've got a couple photos of that just to show you how destructive this was. This was a bridge. And in fact, because, we can get rid of you now. We're done. We're done. We did it. This bridge was located right here. It's now an area that's completely buried by the mud flow and also by all the sediment that's backed up from that dam. So you actually can't get to this. It's not the site that it was in 1980. But that was part of the old highway that went up to Spirit Lake. Midday through on the 18th, the mud flow was so bad, it picked this thing up, this giant truss bridge, turned it, sent it downstream for maybe about a quarter mile, and it just deposited, just sat there. And then it took years for scrappers to take things out of it. But that's a massive bridge. That is not an insignificant piece of people's creation that was just taken down. And so you have, unfortunately, the property damage was terrible along the river, as you heard about Maple Flats. You have that bridge that we saw at the beginning of the clip of, just this looks like milk chocolate just hitting the bridge. That's where the bridge was. And as you can tell, it got worse. Let's see something. Oh, okay. The dam is really something. It is one of the most impressive creations, really, that the Army Corps of Engineers has ever done to try and find a novel way to address this 600,000 pound, gorilla of sediment coming down that were threatening people's, lively or their homes and whatnot. So yeah, these are just scenes that are along the North Fork Toutle River. This shot is just fantastic. I mean, thank you, Randy. I appreciate that. This guy, his name is Gordon, and I miss poses like this in photos. Just, it's got like the 70s, like twisted hip going, like he's not meaning to do it, but that's a great pose. And you can see, imagine the height of your standard roadside sign. We're talking about maybe what, like 8 feet, 9 feet, maybe? I don't know. That's wild. And so, yeah, beyond the banks of the river, this was where a bridge was located on Highway 504. This kind of looks like that guy's place, doesn't it? A little bit. It might even be it. Harry McNutt. Yeah. We press on. So you can see the bathtub effect of the mud. You can see how high it went. I don't think anybody ever could have anticipated when they were buying property that the river was going to go that high, let alone be full of volcanic material. This was a gauge. See? Right, Randy, exactly. Like there's a JCPenney's and the Bon and other Kmart. Boy, it really just brings back a vintage. See, I'm like a millennial, so I remember when millennials were going on Etsy and buying old JCPenney clothes and whatnot. That was like our thing, was to dress retro, and then that kind of just died on the vine. But this was a gauge, getting back to this was a gauge that the U.S. Geological Survey had to measure water, completely ripped down to the foundation and then some. I mean, the power, I mean, it was basically, this was on the 18th. This was a shot that was taken by the gentleman who was Dave Johnston's grad assistant. This was Harry Glicken's photo. And Harry Glicken, when he found out of the eruption, stayed and was absolutely distraught that Dave was very likely lost. He attempted to go on multiple search and rescue helicopters into the area, but it was so bad that every single time they would get up to it, to the ridge area, and they couldn't go forward because of just the eruption was still happening. But he did take photos of this beginning part, and you can see it looks like chocolate milk, right? Like it looks like it's, quick is what it looks like, Ovaltine, if you will. I'm 38. Why am I saying Ovaltine? Anyways, because there were commercials in the 90s. That's why. Okay. But it had the consistency of concrete. And so as the landslide went down the North Fork Toutle River, it eventually stops. And then all the water that was coming from melted glaciers and whatnot started just going over the top of this. And as we saw earlier, those hummocks. So it took a while to get past this landslide, which went, 12, 13, 15 miles downstream. And so when it finally got to flat land, it went. And it went in a clip. There's another photo of that bridge. There's some more property, and you can see even way, way back here. I think I know where this is at. This is a little bit closer to Interstate 5. This is actually the Cowlitz River. So the problems that were faced on the Toutle River, which is the drainage to the west of Mount St. Helens, it meets up with the Cowlitz River. And that goes to Kelso and Longview and empties into the Columbia, and then the Columbia into the Pacific, and that's that. And so all downstream was impacted by this. And so you had along the floodplains on the Cowlitz, where there were farms near Castle Rock and whatnot, completely covered with feet of mud. And here, I forget where this was. I think it might have been Kelso, but this trailer park was also inundated by the mud. This is near the town of Toutle, and this was the bridge that was wiped out that connected, or that was right outside of town. There's some more property. This was a bridge. If you've ever seen a video clip from Mount St. Helens of this lahar, and there's what looks to be a cabin that's riding on top of this flood, and it hits a bridge. It goes underneath the bridge. It's a very powerful scene. It goes to show you just how fast that flood was moving. This is the bridge that it hit. Well, it was the bridge that it hit. A couple hours later, it too went under. But unlike that other bridge, nobody ever took any photos of it. This was, I believe, a boys' camp that was up the Toutle. There's a scientist that's there. There's another shot of that bridge that I was just talking about. This is up towards a logging camp that was up the North Fork Toutle called Camp Baker that was run by Weyerhaeuser. I'm looking at my other screen here, don't worry. This was a railroad bridge that was taken out by a mud flow on the South Toutle. And it was so powerful, it took this trestle and took it downstream, but you can see the rail still connecting both sides. It's wild. Yeah, no, it is. I remember when I visited RM Joyce, I remember I saw how murky it was, and the dam is still doing its job, but they've had to raise it a few times along the spillway because of just how much has deposited over time, and I think they're still trying to find ways to continue to mitigate that. It is going to be a problem that's going to last for a very, 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 very long time. But talk about the power here to see that this trestle just wiped out, but yet still keep the tie going or whatnot. This is another. This was apparently, I learned about this. I believe it was a dentist or somebody that lived in Kelso or Longview that bought this house, and it was completely wrecked. They thought it was way in the, out of any spring freshet, if you will. Not the case. And then here's two more photos, and then we'll end on this photo, which is just goes to show you, these were people's lives that were upended, completely upended. I've read a lot of stories in the, you can imagine I'm throwing a ton of money into this now. I'm not really, but it's for the passion. A number of stories from the major paper in Kelso Longview, which is the Daily News, still going. Go Small Town News, and then the Columbian, which is in Vancouver, among other outlets. And you read the stories of those who lives were upended. There was a woman who was at the evacuation center that President Jimmy Carter visited on May 22nd, and she had a chance to talk with President Carter, and she just said that, I don't even know if I have a home to go back to. And her home was, I don't think was damaged, but just imagine if you had this, hanging over your head, that this thing that you can't predict could erupt at any time and could send down another wall of water and then can completely wipe out, whatever hasn't been damaged yet. And you had to really weigh the cost-benefit analysis. And so a lot of people moved away, but a lot of people stayed too. Like those folks that you saw in the segment, they felt that they were safe. And those who have stayed have been proven to be mostly right, that it has been safe. But it's a part of daily life, though, nonetheless. The mountain could wake up again, and now there's a glacier that's within the crater. And if it does wake up, there's a very good chance that if it woke up, not like what we saw in 2004 to 2008, but we saw something a little bit more. I got to tell you, it's really, really, it is something that will have to be addressed again. Randy brought up something that I would like to bring up too, or would like to talk a little bit about, because why not? We'll wrap this up shortly. Randy brings up what is known as the miner's car, and I don't think this is actually the location. They were at Meta Lake. So there's the car. I was looking at the people themselves. We didn't talk a lot about victims today, and that's a touchy subject that I have been very mindful about over the last year plus of doing this. 6 years has been being very mindful about the victim stories. And the stories of the Parkers is a very good example of that. You had a husband and wife and their nephew who were prospectors. And yes, prospectors are still a thing, folks. They are. And this area of Washington State was the scene of a very interesting attempt at a gold rush in the early 20th century, except that it wasn't just gold, it was copper and other precious metals. Unfortunately, nothing ever really came out of it, but there were a lot of mines in the area. And so these three bought into a group that was going to attempt to try and find something in one of these, projected veins. And they had permission to be there. They got waivers to say that they were allowed to do there because they were doing business. And there they were, 9 miles from the volcano. Richard, Natalie, and Donald and Natalie were the husband and wife. Richard was their nephew, and they parked their Pontiac Grand Prix at Meta Lake and I think they either hiked or they took some sort of like ATV or something there to their chalet, which was just built that year. And that's where they were on May 18th. And their discovery was later broadcast. You don't see anything, thankfully. 2020, at least, they had the sense to not show that. You kind of. So I'm not going to show it, but you basically see the search and rescue operation that finds the three of them, and the area is just completely decimated. I mean, it was tall, old growth, forest, just leveled in this valley, which is sort of near the headwaters of the Green River, which is a major drainage north of the mountain. So the car that they drove in is this 1972 Grand Prix, and you can't. This photo even is during search and rescue operations. So this is right after the eruption. And let me see if I can get a little bit bigger. Yes, I can. We're doing it. Okay. And it doesn't even look like an 8-year-old car. It doesn't even look like a car. It was just completely decimated by the eruption. The upholstery, the interior, anything that was plastic was melted. Part of how scientists for the Geological Survey and other institutions were able to project or give an estimation of how hot the lateral blast, its official scientific name is pyroclastic density flow. Pyroclastic density flow. Now you know. But the lateral blast, how hot it was, is because they were able to see how these cars, these vehicles, were completely ruined by this eruption. And this vehicle is no exception to that. Today, it's a little worse for the wear. Time has done what the volcano could not do, and rust never sleeps, in the words of a Neil Young live album. No, that's Live Rust. Rust Never Sleeps was the official one. So, it is a little worse for the wear. But it was a very stark reminder, even in the early years after the eruption, of just how powerful this was. The vehicles of the eruption, I think, really do tell stories that words and videos cannot. Mentioned North Fork Survivors a little bit earlier. North Fork Survivors is a private museum. It's also where the buried A-frame is, the cabin that was built just before the eruption and then completely destroyed by the eruption. If you're a cryptozoologist, you can also find things related to Bigfoot there. But the owner, Joe, has acquired what was a private collection with a number of the vehicles that were caught in the blast, including the vehicle of a photographer that is pretty well known by a lot of people who don't know the Mount St. Helens story. Robert Landsberg, who was a Portland photographer who was a few miles west of the mountain when the eruption started. and snapped the last photos of his life, documenting the eruption, basically capturing up close to the point that the lateral blast overtook his location. His car, there's a little bit more of a closer to 1980 photo of his. His car was located along this road here. That's mud flow. This is the South Fork Toutle River. Over here is towards the North Fork Toutle River. But a private collector, here is his car. A private collector, after the eruption, started a private museum, sort of in this first generation of visitor experiences. It closed after about a year or two. But she had held on to these vehicles that she purchased from their original owners of the estates or whatever. And you can see part of one of the remaining parts of Robert Landsberg's vehicle at North Fork Survivors, along with the vehicle that belonged to... there he is. To Reed Blackburn, who was a Colombian photographer who was, I'm going to be not as generous, a little bit roped into this photography scheme that was cooked up by a guy who, let's just say, bent the truth a little bit to say who he was for National Geographic. So basically, it was a Nat Geo kind of U.S. Geological Survey time-lapse photography project that was supposed to document, the volcanoes if it erupted. And unfortunately, Reed lost his life while in the middle of that in his vehicle, which was a Volvo sedan, was completely covered in ash, and unfortunately, Reed was in there. And Joe is helping to restore and to provide a home for it inside of North Fork Survivors. So really is, the visitor facilities that you see today are truly in, I would say, they do an amazing job of telling the story generally, but if you want the human side of the story, North Fork Survivors is a really good place to start. All right, we're going to wrap it up. So I want to thank everybody for joining tonight. I had about 29 views. I was not expecting a lot, but those who stuck around for this whole thing, I appreciate that. I got to tighten it up. I know that. We almost went 2 hours here, which is wild, but I also like to talk, so that's just who I am. I could talk about this topic for ever and ever, which is why I have social media accounts, so I don't have to talk. But we'll do this again sometime, and continue to follow me on social. It has been one of the great joys of my life to be able to take this passion that I have and share it with people, and to have made the connections that I have made with people who were there. I have made friendships out of this. I have spoken with people that I watched on videotapes as a kid. It has been an absolutely surreal and yet incredibly gratifying experience keeping this history alive. And so I just encourage you to follow along on your preferred social media outlet, and I will see you on there. And thank you so much for watching. Take care.